Let's get throwing and let's add a custom throwable projectile entity to our Minecraft mod. More in-depth topics for Minecraft modding available in the 121 modding courses linked below, covering writable and tameable entities, custom entity armor, and even custom entity inventories, among many more awesome topics. Alright, we found this back and tell you once more, and in this tutorial, we're going to be adding a custom throwable projectile entity to our Minecraft mod. Now, that might sound a little crazy, but overall is actually going to be more straightforward. Even though the length of this tutorial would suggest otherwise, the individual classes that we're going to add are actually fairly straightforward to understand. Now, what type of entity are we going to add? We're going to add the Tomahawk. Now, this is really freaking cool, but first things first, the credit over here goes to ArtKek, and very importantly, that if you use this, then and you want to publish the mod, right? So that's totally fine. You can download the Blockbench files and all of the code and everything is linked down below, of course. But if you want to use this and actually publish the mod, then do note that the Tomahawk is licensed under the Creative Commons license. So double check the description for the license as well, just so that you are aware and you follow that license. But if you do, then of course you can use this totally free, not to worry about that. When we have the Blockbench file, we have one for the entity and one for the item. Now, the item here basically is going to be the item that you hold in your hand. So that's going to also then look kind of like this, right? So that when you hold it, it has a pretty cool look to it. And then also one that is actually being sort of spawned as an item and as a projectile that's going to hit other entities. For this, for the entity itself, we're going to go to File, Project, and make sure that the export version over here is set to Fabric 1.17 plus yarn, confirm, and then we can go to File, Export Java entity. This is going to be tomahawk.java. That's going to be awesome. Let's save this. Then we also want to get the texture over here. So right click on this, save as, and this is the tomahawk.png. Awesome. That is everything we need to export from the entity. The animation over here, even though there is an animation associated with it, we actually do not need that. We're going to do the animation via the renderer in just a little bit. And there we go. When it comes to the item model JSON file that we need to export, we want to go to the item model over here. In Blockbench, go to File, Export Block Item Model. This is going to be the Tomahawk item.json. That's going to be awesome. That's going to be fine. And then same thing with the texture. Here we want to right click, save as. Here we just want to make sure that we rename this a little bit. So this one is right now called Tomahawk. We wanted to make sure this is Tomahawk, and then I'm going to do a dash item just so that it's named differently from the texture of the Tomahawk entity, because they are, number one, a little bit different, and number two, they do need to, well, we basically do need to have two different ones. But with this, we basically have everything. So two sort of text files and two textures exported, and then we're going to import those in just a little bit inside of our project. But first, we're going to add the custom item itself. So the custom item is, of course, going to require a custom item class over here. So this is going to be in the item custom package. I'm going to right click new Java class called the Tomahawk item over here. And this will extend from the item class. There we go. Hover over this, create constructor matching super. And then we're going to basically override one method. Now I'll be copying over quite a few things over here. But in this case, the idea is that most of this is going to be sort of understandable, and also I'll explain everything as we go along. And of course, all of the code is also available to you down below, so no worries at all. So we're going to have the use method over here, which is of course going to be the method that gets called when you right click an item of this particular type. And we can see that we're then going to basically spawn a Tomahawk projectile entity, which doesn't exist just yet, because we're going to have to add this in, just a little bit. And it's then going to be set to a velocity, so it's going to be thrown, and there we go. Now, this particular class over here, or this particular method over here, I have gotten from snowball item. So just press shift twice, look at the snowball item class, and all of a sudden you have everything you're basically going to need. I don't know, like I'm going to sound as a broken record, but it is true. You have so many different things you can just take a look at in vanilla, right? Snowball, that throws an entity. So just look at this. How is this going to work? I'm going to substitute my own entity into it, maybe change it around a little bit, and there we freaking go. Right, so you can even see I'm still using the throwball sound event over here, the snowball throw sound event, because why not? That's going to be totally fine. Of course, in your own mod, right, if you want to do this, you can change this up as per usual when it comes to any of the numbers, any of the particulars. You can always change those up. This is just an example. But with this, the item class in theory is done after, when we've actually implemented the actual class, and then we can import it. But for now, let's also register our custom item. The custom item, super easy, of course, in the mod items class. public static final item. This is going to be our tomahawk. There we go, equal to the register item method, tomahawk for the name here, and then a new tomahawk item, passing in new item settings. And then we're going to make it so that it max count is going to be 16, so that you basically have 16 in one stack. Let's add it to the item group because that's an easy thing to miss and or just forget. And of course we want that. And then we're going to immediately go down to all the assets and just add all of the assets as well. So we're going to start, of course, with the translation. Item translation should be super straightforward. I don't think that that's going to be anything crazy. And then down here with the entity, we can also add a tomahawk for the entity over here for the translation. It's not strictly necessary, but it could definitely be a good idea. When it comes to the model, this is, of course, the first file that we have exported, or not the first file that we've exported, but the first thing we're going to add here. This is the tomahawk item.json. We're going to add this into models item and then rename it to tomahawk again. Very important, tomahawk.json over here, so that the name of the JSON file, obviously, once again, is the same as this one. And then inside of the JSON file, very importantly, that we make sure that the textures here are properly sourced, so to speak. So tutorialmod.:item/tomahawk over here. There we go. And we want the same one for the particle. Extremely important that we have this right. Otherwise, it's obviously not going to point to the correct texture. And this one points to textures item. And then here we want the tomahawk-item.png, which we're going to once again rename to tomahawk.png. Of course, name right here, having to match the name of the PNG. I don't know, this should be fairly straightforward, but there we go. And the last thing we want in the assets here is textures entity. We want to make a new directory called tomahawk, and inside of there, we'll add the tomahawk PNG. This is the texture that we've exported from Blockbench from the tomahawk entity model. And there we have it. This should be everything that we're going to need for the assets, so we can actually close everything right here and then actually go in and, well, register or create the custom entity. So in the entity package, custom, we're going to make a new Java class called the Tomahawk Projectile Entity. There we go. And this is going to extend from the persistent projectile entity. We're going to implement the get default item stack method. Hover over this again, create constructor matching super. In this case, we're going to choose the first one. That's going to be awesome. And there we go. Now we're going to make this public, and then I'll copy over a couple of things. However, I will basically explain as we copy over and go along. And once again, the code is available in the description, so in the GitHub repository, so you can double check it there. The first thing is two different fields over here, the rotation field as well as a grounded offset. I'll explain both of those when we get to them. Then we have a other constructor, so we need a secondary constructor, which basically, as you can see, has the tomahawk right here, and then here it gets the tomahawk mod items. So the first thing is going to be fixed once we have registered our tomahawk, then passing in the player, then passing in the world, then passing in the item stack, so basically an item stack of the tomahawk. So this is the default little item that we're throwing, and then shot from. Basically, the idea is that we don't shoot this tomahawk from anything, we're just throwing the tomahawk, so we don't have basically like a weapon, basically. When it comes to the item stack over here, we're simply going to return a new item stack of mod items.tomahawk, because that is the default item stack. When you go up to this particular entity, when it's on the ground and you want to pick this up, then it's going to give you a tomahawk. That's the idea. And then we're going to copy over the last four methods over here, and those are going to look kind of like this. So we're going to start with the get rendering rotation, and we're going to end with the on block hit. I'm going to start at the top over here to explain all of this. So the get rendering rotation method is going to be responsible for rotating the rendering of the model, right? So obviously when the model is flying, what I would like to have happen is that it's going to rotate like this, because that's number one, going to look pretty cool, and number two, it makes a lot of sense. And that is what's happening with the rotation over here. So every time the method gets called, you're going to add to the rotation, and that's basically the idea. So we have this, and we're going to see where this is used in a little bit inside of the renderer. The is grounded, we're going to simply need so that the persistent projectile entity over here, the in ground, the Boolean is going to be, well, sort of exposed to the outside world because it is protected and we couldn't then access it, so that we have a public Boolean over here. The on entity hit method, I think that you should probably from the name know when this is going to be called, when the projectile entity over here hits another entity. And the idea here is that once it hits it, then we're going to damage it by 4. and then discard the projectile that was basically just sort of thrown. And then lastly, the on-block hit obviously gets called when you hit a block, and that is where the grounded offset is used. The grounded offset is used so that the following thing happens. If we were to have a particular block over here, right? Let's just say that this is the block, just for the sake of argument over here. So the blue line is the block, right? And we hit this block. That's all fine and well, right? However, the issue is that if we were to hit the block and it sticks like this, that looks awesome, right? Absolutely, I agree with you. But what if the block all of a sudden is here and the way that the tomahawk would stop is like kind of like this? That would look kind of weird. So obviously what we need to do is we need to rotate the tomahawk around, right? Like something like this. And then we need to rotate it around a little bit more, maybe something like this, and then something like this. So basically this rotation that needs to occur and the sort of the offset, right? That is what happens with this, depending on what side of the block it hits. That's the idea. Now this has some drawbacks too. It is fairly straightforward and pretty simple, but the drawbacks are that it sometimes snaps a little bit weirdly. So that is definitely a thing. But you can, of course, fix this or change this up as you go along as well. So no worries there at all. And we'll see the grounded offset once again in the renderer. But that is basically everything we need for the entity class itself. So let's go to the mod entities over here and register it. So the mod entities, well, that's going to be interesting as well. Public static final entity type of type tomahawk projectile entity. This is the tomahawk, of course. There we go. Equal to registry.register, passing in registries.entity type, comma, an identifier.of. This is tutorial mod.modID, and then the tomahawk. There we go. After the first closing parentheses, comma, entity type.builder.create, passing in tomahawk projectile entity : new, and then a spawn group of miscellaneous in this case. After the first closing parenthesis, we'll also set the dimension to 0.5f and 1.15f, and then call the build over here, and there we go. What you'll find is that there is an error in the constructor over here. That is expected, and the fix is pretty crazy. After the builder dot, so exactly before the create, you want to put in the angled brackets and then pass in tomahawk projectile entity, and the issue fixes itself. That's some generic stuff from Java. I don't know why exactly that works. I mean, it is obviously the reason why it works is it points to the correct sort of to the correct constructor for some reason, but it's still a little bit crazy to me that the syntax is like after the dot is very strange. But regardless, that's going to be okay, and that is basically what you're going to need here. Also double check the description below the GitHub repository for the code if anything here doesn't quite work. You can go back to the projectile entity and import the mod entities class, thus finishing the projectile entity itself. We can then also go back to the item class to import the tomahawk projectile entity over here, and that will then also finishes the item. And we're left with two more classes that we need to add, and that's going to be the model as well as the renderer. So in the model, let's first of all, so let's create those. Entity client is going to be the tomahawk projectile model in this case, and then we also have the tomahawk projectile renderer. We're going to start with the model, as that is the last thing that we still have from like exported from Blockbench. We're going to simply copy the contents of this over, and then we'll see. So inside of here, we're going to have this. We're gonna paste this in, and as always, of course, this is also available to you down below, so no worries there at all. We're going to have, so we're going to have the, we're just going to import everything that we have here. Sometimes when the import does not work, just delete one of the names over here, and you can see all of a sudden, oh, of course, we know what you meant. I don't know why that sometimes happens, but it is what it is. We don't need to import at the bottom over here yet. We want to change the name of the constructor, and we want this to extends from the entity model of type tomahawk projectile entity. We then go down to the set angles method, and here we're going to change the entity to a tomahawk projectile entity, which is then also going to fix this error. We're going to import the matrix stack. Once again, sometimes it doesn't work, and then you just delete the K, add it again, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, of course, this vertex stack and this matrix stack, absolutely. And then the 4 floats over here, we're going to replace them with an integer called color, and then passing in that color over here, there, and there we have it. That is pretty much everything we're going to need here. We also are going to need the entity model layer. So this is the same thing that we've had in the Mantis model right here, the entity model layer. We can even, in theory, just copy it over and then just add this here. It's not called Mantis, of course. This would be the Tomahawk. And then here, we just change the name to Tomahawk. And that is literally it. That's all we need in this case. And that is the entirety of the model done. We don't need to set any angles. We don't need to change anything over here. That's all we need. And then instead of the renderer, it's also not as crazy as one might think. Let's take a look. So this is going to be the extending of the entity renderer of a type Tomahawk projectile entity. Let's hover over this to implement the get texture method. Hover over this again, create constructor matching super. We're going to make this public over here, and we'll then need a field. And this field is actually going to be a protected Tomahawk projectile model. We're going to call this model. Very interesting. Instead of the constructor, we're going to say this.model is equal to CTX is going to be equal to a new Tomahawk projectile model, CTX.getPart, passing in Tomahawk projectile model.tomahawk. So this is the model entity layer over here, and then we're going to get that particular part. When it comes to the texture, I don't think I need to, well, I mean, explain anything here. It is literally just going to be, well, the tutorial mode, of course, we need to import, but basically it just points to the texture, right, that we've literally like added a couple of minutes ago in the textures entity Tomahawk, and this is Tomahawk PNG. Make sure to not forget the .png over here in the identifier. That is very important. And then we still need to render the model itself. And that's going to happen with the render method. Once again, I'm going to copy over and then explain. Here, when it comes to the texture, we can actually then get this identifier and simply add this here again. Or if you want to be a little bit more proper, and of course, you can also just, you know, use this, like take this and basically make a field out of this. Either one works, it's totally fine. But the idea is, or what I want to draw your attention to is, of course, the is grounded if statement over here. And the idea here being that if the entity is not grounded, right, so it is currently flying, we're going to take the positive X rotation and we're going to, well, continue to rotate it via the rendering rotation over here. So the idea is that as long as the Tomahawk is flying, it's going to rotate kind of like this. And then as soon as it is grounded, right, so else statement over here, as soon as it's grounded, we're going to use the grounded offset that it got from the placement or the direction of the block it hit, and it's going to set that way, and it's going to stay that way. Once again, is this the best way to do it? I don't know, probably not. Like, all roads lead to Rome, so there are plenty of different ways that you can basically facilitate the rotating of the Tomahawk. This is the first way that I found this to easily work, in my opinion, but of course, implement it, have it work once, and then just play around with this. I highly recommend it. I even encourage it. It's basically the best way to learn anything like this. And with this, we have everything we need. So now we just need to connect everything together, so to speak. And that connecting together mostly happens inside of the tutorial mode client over here. So for this, we're going to actually just duplicate the two calls over here. So there's the entity model layer registry, register model layers. This is going to be for the Tomahawk projectile model.tomahawk, and this is then going to take, or, you know, use the texture model data of the Tomahawk projectile model. So we're going to connect the model layer to the model itself. And then with the registry over here for the renderers, the mod entities Tomahawk is going to use the Tomahawk projectile renderer : new. And all of a sudden, we have everything that we're going to need. All of the rest is basically done. We've added the item. The item model JSON file is added manually, right? Because it's obviously a completely custom one. And the rest all should be fine. With this, I would say, let's jump into the game and see if it works. Alright, fans, back in Minecraft. And as you can see, the Tomahawk has been added. And if I throw it, I mean, come on. That looks absolutely freaking fantastic. And if it hits a block, you can see that it's going to stick inside of that block. So that is already pretty freaking awesome. I can also pick it back up, right? That is the idea. And if it hits in this direction, it's going to, well, look like it's sticking out like that way, and then this way, and then this way, and then also this way. The only real ones are basically from top and bottom. So you can see this one snaps in, well, basically into this direction. So if you throw it like this, then it's going to look kind of strange sometimes. But like I said, that is a trade-off I was willing to go for because it just is what it is. And when you hit an entity, so let's say our mantis is over here, or let's get some piggies over here. Piggies, right? And I throw this around, you can see it basically hurts them. And I think 3 of them should basically end that pig. Absolutely fantastic. And yeah, that is custom throwable projectiles added to Minecraft. Awesome. Like I said, any modifications, I highly recommend you test this out. But that's going to be it for this tutorial right here. Next time in this video, we'll add a custom boss bar. Hope to see you there. So, yeah.